Coming up on Arirang News, Japan announces the details of its new restrictions on exports to South Korea. So now companies can better assess the damage they'll incur starting later this month when it becomes harder to import the products they need. Seoul's finance minister and its central bank chief hold an emergency meeting about what they say are the temporary risks to the Korean economy. They pledge to stabilize the stock market if need be and foreign exchange. And North Korea says that what it fired yesterday were tactical guided missiles, meant as a warning to South Korea and the U.S. But the Trump administration says there's been an agreement that the regime won't go as far as launching ICBMs. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on our afternoon newscast. I'm Devin Whiting. North Korea has released a report about the projectiles it launched on Tuesday. It says it tested new tactical guided missiles, which are believed to be the same ones tested on July 25th. The regime's leader, Kim Jong-un, said the launches were a warning to Seoul and Washington about their joint military exercises. Oh Jung-hee reports.
Tuesday's missile launch was another demonstration of force against the South Korea-U.S. joint military exercises, North Korea says. On Wednesday, Pyongyang state-run Korean Central News Agency released a report and photos of Tuesday's missile test. The North had fired two short-range missiles early Tuesday from its southwestern county of Gwail in Hwanghae-namdo province. The missiles had an altitude of around 37 kilometers and flew some 450 kilometers. The North state media confirmed that the regime had tested a new type of tactical guided missile on Tuesday and that leader Kim Jong-un was on site to oversee the launch. The report said two tactical guided missiles, which were fired from the western part of the territory, flew across North Korea and successfully hit the targeted islet in the East Sea. Kim Jong-un said this would be an adequate warning to the ongoing joint military exercises between Seoul and Washington. North Korea has conducted 4 test launches of short-range projectiles in the past 2 weeks. According to North Korean reports, 2 were test launches from a multiple rocket launcher, which each flew 250 and 220 kilometers. And the other 2 tests were of tactical guided missiles. Believed to be similar to Russia's Iskander-class ballistic missiles, they each flew 450 and 600 kilometers. The North continues to fire short-range missiles that put the whole of South Korea's territory within their target area. Plus, the North fired the projectiles from different locations every time. Pundits say that the North is looking to show that its missile capabilities are advancing and becoming harder to detect. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton has revealed that President Trump has what he says is an understanding that Kim Jong-un will not launch longer-range ICBMs. At the same time, President Trump is monitoring the Korean Peninsula situation. Lee Seung-jae reports.
On Tuesday, North Korea conducted its 4th round of missile tests since July 25th. Speaking to Fox News on Tuesday following the regime's latest launches, U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton said Pyongyang appears to have conducted a series of missile tests in recent weeks to get a new weapon fully operational, adding that the projectiles appear to be ballistic missiles. Seoul has also concluded the projectiles were short-range ballistic missiles, which North Korea is banned from testing under UN Security Council resolutions. However, the North disputes those assessments, claiming it's testing a new rocket launch system. The Trump administration has downplayed North Korea's missile launches over the past few weeks, saying they were merely short-range missiles. On Tuesday, Bolton said Trump and Kim Jong-un have an understanding the North Korean leader is not going to launch longer-range intercontinental-range ballistic missiles, adding that President Trump is watching the situation very carefully. The launches came as North Korea denounced joint military exercises between South Korea and the U.S. that began on Monday. However, Bolton dismissed the regime's protests, saying the drills are command post exercises that are largely computer simulations. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, John Bolton says if Washington decides to deploy its own intermediate-range missiles to Asia, the aim is purely defensive and meant to protect America's allies, South Korea and Japan. He was responding Tuesday to China's protests against U.S. plans to deploy missiles throughout Asia after having withdrawn last week from a missile treaty with Russia. If it does deploy them, Beijing had warned it would not stand idly by. According to Defense Secretary Mark Esper, however, the U.S. is now free to do so and would like to sooner rather than later. A rare trilateral meeting between the top diplomats of South Korea, China, and Japan will reportedly take place in Beijing this month. According to Japan's public broadcaster NHK, Seoul's Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa, Wang Yi of China, and Taro Kono of Japan will meet on August 21st. It says the main agenda will be Japan's export controls on Seoul and North Korea's missile launches. It'll be their first trilateral meeting since August 2016. NHK reports separate bilateral talks between the three countries are also scheduled. If Kang and Kono do meet, it'll be their second meeting this month, following talks on the sidelines of an ASEAN forum in Thailand. Back in January, South Korea sent court documents to Japan intended for the Nippon Steel, the company ordered by the court to compensate the Koreans it forced to work for it during wartime. It's now emerged that the Japanese Foreign Ministry sent those documents back last month and did not forward them on. That's according to lawyers for the victims who said Tuesday that Japan did not explain why it sent them back. They contained the court decision ordering the seizure of some of Nippon's assets in Korea as compensation. The lawyers said the document's return is a clear violation of the Hague Conventions, which require a legitimate explanation when a court ruling is not delivered. South Korea will add 7 more hiking trails along the demilitarized zone by next year. That's according to Culture Minister Park Yang-woo, who was speaking Tuesday on TV announcing the new trails and 10 other DMZ tourist attractions. Currently, there are 3 DMZ peace trails open in Gosang and Cheolwon in Gangwon-do Province and Paju, Gyeonggi-do Province. Locations for the new ones will include Gimpo and Yeoncheon in Gyeonggi-do Province and Hwacheon and Yanggu in Gangwon-do Province. Japan has announced the details of the new regulations that'll take effect later this month when Korea's taken off Japan's white list of trading partners. Now companies can try and figure out just how badly they'll be affected when it gets harder to get the materials they need. Hong Yu reports.
Japan's detailed enforcement of export regulations includes a decision last Friday to exclude South Korea from the so-called white list of preferential trading partners. These new regulations will come into effect after 21 days. This means that some items out of the 1,100 strategic materials that can be used for military purposes will not benefit from a simplified inspection process. And non-regulated items could also be subject to separate approval and will have to go through a long process of export approval by Japan's Trade Ministry, should Japan consider that they could be used to make weapons. High-purity hydrogen fluoride, photoresist, and fluorine polyamide, the 3 semiconductor and display materials under Japan's export restrictions, fall under this category. Japan also announced a new system of classifying trade partners into groups A to D. Under the new system, countries included on the white list will be classified into Group A, in which Japan's regulated items benefit from a separate screening exemption if they get approval from Japan's Trade Ministry once every 3 years. South Korea is categorized into Group B and will have to go through a more difficult process of export approval. But even for countries in Group B, some items get special general comprehensive authorization, so they can benefit from a screening exemption. Special general comprehensive authorization is given to Japanese companies selected by the Japanese government for their approved export management. Countries categorized into Group D are those that Japan's Trade Ministry judges to have low credibility, like North Korea and Iraq. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
Senior finance officials, including the heads of South Korea's finance ministry and central bank, held an urgent meeting for the first time in 2 years this morning to discuss how to stabilize markets against what are being called temporary risks. Won Jung-hwan reports.
Finance Minister Hong Nam-yi and Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol held an urgent meeting with other senior finance officials on Wednesday morning to discuss Japan's export curbs and the U.S. decision to label China as a currency manipulator. It is the first time the heads of the finance ministry and the central bank have met since the aftermath of North Korea's sixth nuclear test some 2 years ago. During Wednesday morning's meeting, South Korea's finance minister vowed to take preemptive measures to stabilize the country's financial and foreign exchange markets. Hong said the increased volatility in the domestic market was the result of short-term risks that happened to overlap, and insisted that he will cope with such issues as swiftly and sternly as possible. On top of around-the-clock monitoring, the minister vowed to take measures to stabilize the markets according to the finance ministry's contingency plan.
Under the contingency plan that has already been devised, we will take swift and bold steps through all available means, such as stock market stabilization measures and easing regulations on buybacks and short sellings at a suitable time.
And regarding Japan's export curbs against South Korea, he said he will provide full support to reduce any sudden damage.
We will strongly urge Japan to promptly withdraw its improper measures against South Korea and will provide support to companies to minimize the short-term damage, including decisive measures to help companies become less dependent on Japan.
And BOK Governor Lee stressed the need to curb volatility in the foreign exchange market.
As now is when we must focus on financial and foreign exchange market stabilization. The Bank of Korea will continue its market stabilization efforts while closely cooperating with the government.
He stressed that maintaining the country's economic credibility is more important than anything else, and that the central bank and the government will pool their wisdom to manage Korea's economy to this end. 원정환, 아리랑 뉴스.
Korea's main stock index, the Kospi, closed lower today for a sixth session in a row. Continued worries over the trade with Japan and what many fear is a U.S.-China currency war. The Kospi fell 0.4% to 1909, keeping near a 3.5-year low. The secondary Kosdaq, however, continued to recover from its rout on Monday, adding almost 2.4% to close at just under 565. The Korean currency, which has weakened drastically in just a week, stayed about where it was the session before at just under 12.15 to the U.S. dollar. And it's time now for an in-depth look at the global markets this afternoon. And for that, I'm joined on the line by Dr. Huang Sailin, Research Fellow at the Korea Capital Market Institute. Dr. Huang, thank you for coming on as always.
Thank you for having me with you today.
So after that big drop on Monday, Wall Street clawed some of that back, some relief over the China currency situation. Korean stocks, though, it was touch and go today. What's the story here?
In Wall Street, the stocks ended higher Tuesday, rebounding from their worst day of the year, after China's central bank indicated it wants its currency to trade at a higher than expected level against the dollar, easing tensions about the nation's using its currency as a weapon in the trade war. Shares in Asia fell for an eighth straight session on Wednesday on lingering worries over the escalating U.S.-China trade war, but losses and nerves were recovered somehow by White House assurances that it wants to press ahead with negotiations. Signs that China is stepping in to steady the yuan after its recent sharp fall also helped ease investors' fears of a possible global currency war. Japan's Nikkei slid 0.33% on worries that a stronger yen will put more pressure on its struggling exporters. Shares in Hong Kong were little changed after heavy selling in the previous sessions, but Shanghai Composite Index declined 0.24% so far. South Korea's Kospi lost 0.41% today.
Now, as we heard a minute ago, the Japanese government's released the content of the actual regulation that'll take Korea off its trade whitelist of the some 1,100 strategic items. The question is, which ones will now require separate inspection to be shipped to Korea? What effect do you see this having on Korean industry?
Many of the Korean companies who are importing their basic materials from Japan will suffer from this export restrictions. The promulgation by Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry will put the bill into effect August 28th, as the enforcement takes 21 days. The delisting of Seoul from its white list will likely cause delays on Seoul-bound shipments and a serious blow to South Korean tech industries that rely heavily on Japanese materials. By revising the comprehensive permit handling decrees, Japan can select only those items with high damage to Korea and low damage to Japanese exporters that can be excluded from the comprehensive permit and are subject to individual permits. The individual permits allows the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry to decide whether to approve their export application within 90 days, which may intentionally delay the review or to harass Korean companies in a way that demands documents to be submitted at the last minute.
Well, this issue is obviously having ripple effects throughout the Korean financial markets. So for that, the Bank of Korea governor and the finance minister held a meeting today to discuss that issue. What does the Korean government need to be doing right now to respond?
The Korean government will need to take swift and bold steps, if necessary, to help stabilize the financial markets. The country's economic fundamentals still remain strong despite many trade-related bad news from outside. However, it is pretty obvious that sluggish exports and investment caused by external conditions, along with poor business performance and Japan's export restrictions, are adding to difficulties. The contingency plan is expected to include such policy measures as stock market stabilization measures, the easing regulations on stock buybacks, and prohibiting short selling. The Bank of Korea will need to continue its market stabilization efforts while closely cooperating with government as well. The Bank of Korea could cut the benchmark interest rate before the end of the year, in addition to the foreign exchange market intervention to dampen the impacts from abroad.
All right, Dr. Huang, we'll be watching those and any other measures to come out. Meanwhile, thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Now, today, President Moon paid a visit to the first South Korean company to successfully develop a key part in robotics, harmonic decelerators. It's a company called SBB Tech. Harmonic decelerators used to be imported mostly from Japan, making them highly vulnerable to moves like the one to exclude South Korea from Japan's whitelist. This was the president's first on-site visit since Japan started taking those measures, reflecting his government's determination to help local companies localize key materials. Moon said Japan's trade restrictions could end up giving technology-rich companies the chance to take a big leap forward. Listening to the difficulties employees face in the field, he instructed relevant ministries to reflect them in their policies. In the latter half of this year, South Korean companies and workers are seeing some changes in terms of labor law. That includes the 52-hour work week limit applying to more companies, a broader ban on harassment in the workplace, and a bigger and longer unemployment benefit. Yoon Jung-min has the details.
More industries were included in the mandatory 52-hour maximum work week system from July. 21 industries had originally been granted a one-year grace period, but now all of those industries have to abide by the maximum work week rule. Broadcasters, financial services, bus services, accommodation, and the postal service are among the industries that now can't force employees to work excessive hours. If they violate the law, they will be first given a chance to fix the violation. If they don't take heed, company owners could potentially face up to 2 years in prison or be fined up to $17,000. The law now affects more than 1,000 additional companies and over 1 million workers in those industries. But some are raising doubts about whether these industries can strictly observe the law due to their notoriously long work hours. Also, from this October, people who have lost their jobs will get a higher unemployment allowance. According to the revised Employment Insurance Act, the allowance will be raised to 60% of the average wage, up from the previous 50%. Also, the revision raises the payment period by 30 days. Now, people can receive the allowance for 270 days or around 9 months. In July, a new law came into effect to prevent harassment in the workplace. If workers use their superior status or power to cause physical or mental suffering to other employees, they can be reported to the company's owners. Once a case is reported, employers must immediately launch an investigation and take proper action, such as separating victims from perpetrators in the workplace. If they fail to follow the rule, they may face a prison term of up to 3 years or be fined by up to $25,000. But some say it could be difficult for employees to report the case if employers are the ones causing the problem and they are asking the government to fix the problem. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The U.S. is investigating Chinese banks for allegedly helping North Korea develop nuclear weapons. The transactions in question could be as recent as 2 years ago, as our Kan Hyung-woo reports.
3 major Chinese banks are being probed by the U.S. for allegedly helping finance Pyongyang's nuclear weapons program, which would be a violation of the international sanctions on North Korea. According to Bloomberg, Washington is investigating hundreds of millions of dollars in suspected financial transactions. Citing an appeals court opinion, Bloomberg reported that American prosecutors do not currently suspect the unnamed Chinese banks of intentionally violating sanctions. But the appeals court said the U.S. government believes the banks hold records that might clarify how North Korea finances its nuclear weapons program. Washington has been trying to acquire banking records from 2012 to 2017. The 5-year span was the period leading up to North Korea's successful test of nuclear arms and missile systems, including an ICBM launch in 2017. Quoting a former CIA and Treasury Department official, Bloomberg added that if the government finds evidence that banks knowingly aided the transactions, the U.S. could fine them billions of dollars. Meanwhile, a new UN report says North Korea amassed some $2 billion for its WMD programs, using cyber attacks to steal money from financial institutions and cryptocurrency exchanges and launder the money in cyberspace. According to Reuters, the confidential report to the UN Security Council says Pyongyang is also continuing to enhance its nuclear and missile programs, despite not testing a nuclear bomb or ICBM in many months. The North Korean mission to the UN did not respond to a request for comment. A U.S. State Department official was quoted as saying Washington calls upon all responsible states to take action to counter North Korea's ability to engage in malicious cyber activities. Kan Hyung-woo, Arirang News.
And just a day after he labeled China a currency manipulator, President Trump saying he'll hit China harder on trade if he has to. Kim Yo-sun has this report.
Following Washington's designation of China as a currency manipulator, President Trump is continuing to keep the squeeze on Beijing. Trump tweeted Tuesday that his administration has done what no previous U.S. administrations have done, stood firmly beside American farmers. He added he'll do so again next year if needed to ensure China is not able to hurt them. Watchers are viewing the tweets as a sign Trump will maintain his current stance if Washington cannot conclude a satisfactory trade deal with Beijing. Trump has already announced he will levy an additional 10% tariff on Chinese imports worth $300 billion from September 1st. Trump's top economic advisor Larry Kudlow emphasized Tuesday that the U.S. holds the upper hand in trade negotiations with Beijing, claiming the Chinese economy is now crumbling. In an interview with CNBC, the director of the White House National Economic Council also stressed Washington's determination to hold further trade talks with China. Explaining Washington is preparing to hold trade negotiations with Beijing in the U.S. next month, he also hinted there could be changes to the tariffs imposed against China. This comes as U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton warned Beijing would face consequences if it does not halt all its wrong actions, which include currency manipulation and the theft of American intellectual property rights. Speaking to Fox News on Tuesday, Bolton also stated that Washington will go to the International Monetary Fund if Beijing continues to tinker with its currency. Kim Hye-san, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.